Hi everyone, welcome to a new video. Today we are talking about telephoto lenses. In particular, I want to talk to you about one of the least used features of these telephoto lenses that it's rarely used but in the right situation can be very powerful. It's a function called focus preset, and with today's autofocus systems that are super fast and super reliable, it's not as important as it was in the DSLR era, but in the right scenario, it can still make a big difference. At the end of the video, I will also explain how I set all of the controls on my telephoto lens to achieve the best results. For this video, I will use my Canon 600 RF lens, but note that these principles apply to all the professional big telephoto lenses. You can find a list of all the lenses that features focus preset function down in the description, so check it out. I'm pretty sure your lens is also in that list. If you're new to the channel, my name is Paolo Sartori. I'm a professional wildlife and nature photographer from Italy. On this channel, I'm sharing tips and tricks and behind the scenes of my work, so make sure you subscribe to the channel if you want to see more. So I was recently in a forest in Poland where my main goal was to find and photograph the European bison. This is the biggest land mammal that can be found in Europe, and it was almost extinct in the early 1900s. And now, thanks to a very good conservation effort, the population is growing again, and these giants can be found again in the wilderness. Since I was there, I also spent a few days in some local heights looking for raptors and other birds, and in one of those I found the perfect conditions to use the focus preset function. In this particular hide, we had two main perches where we would expect birds to land, and these perches were quite close to the hide. And this is necessary because we want to fill the frame with our subject, so the birds must be close to us. Even if it looks like a very simple scenario, it can be tricky for the autofocus. In fact, sometimes the autofocus would just lock on the background, and since the perch is very close to us, it will be so blurred that the camera is not able to recognize it anymore. So basically the camera will keep looking for subjects in the background while a bird might land on the perch and take off again, and the camera is still locked in the background. Now, a way to prevent this might be to use the focus range selector. Like on this lens, I could set it between 2 and 16 meters. I prefer to avoid this because I might have a bird landing on the perch, then taking off and flying away. And if I do this, the autofocus will only track up to 16 meters of distance, and after that it will be locked and the bird will not be in focus anymore. So I try, if I can, to stay with the full range of focal lengths, and instead I would use the focus preset to solve this problem. How do we actually set and use this focus preset? Let's start with the physical controls. We have the focus preset button, which is this round button here. We have a slider, a selector that can be turned to off, on, or it can also go to a beep that tells us what we are doing with this function. And also this ring here, this selector, can be used to trigger the focus preset in two different settings if we want. So how do we set the focus preset to a single distance autofocus? First, we have to move the slider here to on or to the beep setting. In this case, I'm putting it on the sound setting so that we can hear what I'm doing. But usually when I'm in the field, I will just use it on the on without the sound. Once this is done, the only thing to do is to focus on the spot that we want to be in focus. And while the camera is still focused there, we press this for 1 second. Now I can track my subjects, move the focus around, use continuous focus, use whatever focus function I want. Every time I will rotate this ring in either directions, my lens will focus back on that exact same spot. In my case, in the hide in Poland, I needed to preset my focus to two different spots at two different distances. So what we have to do in this case is, again, to focus where we want the focus to be. We press the set button for at least 1 second, and we rotate the ring in the direction where we want the setting to be saved. Then we can focus on the second one, press for 1 second, rotate in the other direction, and now I have in one direction I have one setting, and in the other direction I have the other setting. This setting will stay saved as long as the lens is connected to the camera. So I can turn the camera on and off and the distance will still be saved. But if I change the lens, then I have to do the setting again. These big lenses feature also a number of other functions. One of those is the AF stop button. This one is meant to stop the tracking and lock the focus at any time. We have 4 of these buttons around the ring. I almost never use this one, as I prefer to set my camera so that I can trigger and stop the autofocus with my back button here. I made a full video about that. I will link it up here if you're interested on how I set my back button autofocus system. Some other important settings that we have on these lenses are manual focus speed here. In this case, it's 1 to 3, which means 1 is the fastest. By rotating the manual focus ring, the focus will move around very fast. And 3 is the slowest, meaning that I have to do a bigger rotation to get the same amount of focus movement. I usually leave this function on number 1 because I'm only using the manual focus when the autofocus is locked on something that I don't want, like the background or the foreground. So I just want to quickly spin this and move the focus a lot. We then have the stabilizer, which I leave almost always on unless I'm shooting from a very sturdy tripod. If I'm shooting with a lightweight tripod, I would leave it on in any case, because if the tripod is light, this big lens can still shake a bit, especially if it's windy. So I will leave it on most of the time. And then I have the stabilizer mode here. The number 1 setting is the default, and it's probably good for like 95% of the situations, which is anytime we have a moving subject and we want to be stable. Then we have the setting number 2, which is recognizing the panning movement. I use that mostly if I'm filming and tracking a subject with a pan movement while filming. Another scenario for that would be a bird in flight, where I'm trying to track the movement of a bird, but a linear movement, while the setting number 3 is basically the same as number 1, so it stabilizes every movement of the camera, but the stabilizer is only active when I'm actually taking photos, meaning that if I'm not actually shooting, I can freely track everything, even in a very weird pattern. So that one is useful when we are tracking, for example, birds that are moving in a very random way, not linear, but we might have to change direction very fast. By using the number 3 setting, it will be easier to just keep tracking them without like fighting against the stabilizer. The last setting is something we already mentioned before, is here, it's a bit covered by this lens coat. It's the focus range. This one can be found in all the telephotos, even the smaller ones like the 70 to 200, and allows us to avoid the autofocus locking on the foreground or on the background unnecessarily. There are situations where I want to use these, especially if I'm shooting something like in the bush where I have a lot of vegetation in the foreground and I want to make sure the focus is not picking up on these foreground elements. But I only use it for relatively still subjects or subjects that are not moving a lot in the frame. For example, I can use it for mammals if they are moving like parallel to my shooting position. But if I'm shooting like birds or something that is running towards or away from me, I will just leave it on the full range because I want to avoid a situation where the subject is too close or too far from me and my focus range is not allowing the lens to properly track the subject all the way. Now it's your turn. Take your camera and your telephoto lens, go out, practice the focus preset, experiment with all the settings so that you will be ready when it's needed. You will know exactly what to do and how to make the most of your very expensive equipment.